Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from the last few weeks. This is part 2, so if you want to watch part 1, you can do that. And let's get to it. Love is Blind 89. Mackenzie says, did anybody else notice how during Alexa's party, Colleen was very adamant about Matt only drinking a certain amount? In fact, she seemed pretty distraught when she saw him drinking more than they had agreed on. I can't remember exactly, but she said something about not liking how he is when he is drunk. Thinking back to their major arguments, and also when Matt seemed to be the most angry, they all happened when he had been drinking. End of comment. Yeah, Mackenzie, I didn't make that connection. We can't know his level of intoxication, but the two main angry moments that I can think of off the top of my head in Love is Blind was one when they were having dinner outside on the porch, and at least we saw alcohol. And then the other time was when he got back from the, was it the bachelor party? Was it that night? Or it was or they went to the bar or something, but he was about to break up with Colleen, and he was yelling, and Bartiz was there trying to calm him down. It turned out that Matt himself even admits that he was being triggered over nothing. So yeah, what happens is that when we have, say, preoccupied attachment, which is exhibited by this sort of behavior, I don't know if he has that issue, but he has some red flags for it, that you might engage in a lot of prefrontal cortex activity to modulate your behavior. So you have this impulse to be like, oh no, she's cheating on me, or oh no, she's going to leave me, or oh no, what's going to happen here? And then you know, because you have enough self-awareness to know that that impulse, that intrusive thought is not rational, or at least not healthy to pursue. And so your prefrontal cortex or other areas of the brain become aware of that impulse and will modify it or push back on it or reassure the self or do something, maybe reach out to her and be like, hey, do you love me? And okay. Whereas when you're intoxicated, your brain starts to malfunction. Your brain is literally not functioning correctly. And we all understand this, right? That's why it's hard to drive. It's why it's hard to talk. Beyond a certain level of intoxication, it's hard to stay awake. You might even just fall down. You lack coordination. We understand that. It doesn't just affect movement and reaction time. It affects everything in the brain, even the ability to regulate your breathing and your heart rate. That's why when you drink too much, that you can die, because your brain's ability to keep your heart pumping and to keep your respiration going becomes so compromised that it just stops. It slows down to a point, it becomes so suppressed that you just stop breathing and don't get enough oxygen and you die. And so a part of our brain function is to push back or notice when we have intrusive thoughts that aren't very helpful. And so when someone with preoccupied attachment is intoxicated, there's a pretty good chance that they're not going to be able to regulate their emotions, and they're going to come out swinging, and they're going to really go for it and get angry and get triggered more easily. And so that's, a definite possibility with Matt, which I hadn't considered. And one of the ways that maybe, because I just have so many questions about the two of them, because there's a fair amount of signs that they're doing pretty well. On average, anyway. I mean, as far as a young couple can do. I mean, there's no young couple there's no couple that doesn't have problems, and I'm sure Matt and Colleen have at least that. But there's some signs that there's a good prognosis there. There's also some signs that there's a terrible prognosis and that things are happening terribly behind the scenes. So I keep kind of looking for these clues, and when I hear this, it could go either one of two ways. Either Matt continues to have a problem with alcohol and flies off the handle and becomes preoccupied, triggered, and then goes on a abusive, at least verbally, behavior area. But there's also a possibility that if he just regulates his drinking or doesn't drink at all, then it would be fairly easy for him to manage. I don't know, but I don't know. But thanks for pointing that out, Mackenzie. Lilith says, I meow at my husband. Then he'll look over and mew back and then ask if I want something. But if I meow again, it means I don't need anything and I just want his attention. End of comment. So Jolie says, as a reality TV producer, I think this is one of two things. This is great. So this is a comment on when I was talking about Andrew's fake tears, because I was rewatching Love is Blind, which, is just a ridiculous thing for me to do, to completely rewatch the entire season. But I don't know. I just had to. Just something about this season. I was just like, I want to rewatch it again. Anyway, and I was wondering, rewatching that scene with Andrew's fake tears, I was like, I don't know. Jolie says, as a reality TV producer, I think this is one of two things. Number one, this was a pickup interview shot days or weeks later. And in the original interview, Andrew could have been crying. And now in the pickup interview, where he's asked to wear the same clothes and pretend it's being recorded at the same time, he tried to recreate the emotion he felt at the time when it was raw. The producers used this against him to make him look fake. Just chiming in here. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. But I did know that that happens sometimes, but I don't usually incorporate that into my guesses as to what's happening. But that makes total sense that Andrew originally was crying after being broken up with Nancy, was her name. So Nancy breaks up with Andrew, and originally he was crying, and he seemed, that's interesting because in part of that interview, there seemed to be parts that he was legit crying. And then there were other times when he obviously, was shown using the thing. So that would make total sense to me. Given what we saw, you just imagine he comes out of the pod with Nancy. Immediately, he's still crying. And they interview him. And then later on, weeks later, they're like, we want to do some pickups because we didn't get a chance to ask you all the questions we wanted to, or just want to get coverage on certain ideas. And so come back in, make sure you wear the same thing. And he comes in and he's just like, oh, they want to recreate it. Well, I'm not going to be able to cry. So maybe I'll bring some eye drops, I guess, and maybe that will help them out. And then he sits down, and then that's when he says, so is it okay if I use some eye drops? And the producers are like, yeah, sure. That would make total sense. I would put that far beyond any other hypothesis because what I was saying, like, why would someone do that if they were trying to come across as if they were trying to fake tears, right? If you're trying to fake tears, because what everyone thought happened was he comes out of the pod with Nancy and he's some sort of arrogant, narcissistic robot, and he's trying to come across to the audience like he's a sensitive human being. And so he pulls out these eye drops and uses them and doesn't realize that they're going to use that footage. I just think that you would just have to be so colossally stupid and uninformed on just a variety of domains that he just didn't seem to exhibit to do that. So that this would make so much more sense. He still was, so the amount of things that he would be unaware of for this scenario is still there, but it's far, far less. The one thing he wasn't thinking of was there's a chance that production will actually use this against me. So make sure, even though I'm not getting any clear indication that they're going to use this, like literally before coming on, and being interviewed, they might have even suggested to him, a different producer said, you might want to bring some eye drops in case you want to recreate crying. And I think a more savvy cast member would say, okay, but if I do that, I got to make sure they don't see it because they might use that against me, even though they're asking me to do it. Anyway, or number two, he was set up by production. He probably wasn't a favorite of theirs since he does come off as braggadocious or someone who just doesn't make the producer's job easy. So they felt justified in making him look bad. They could have told him to recreate the tears and then make it seem like it's his idea. As a reality TV producer, I actually think the cast members, this cast member is more innocent than not in this scenario. End of comment. Yeah, okay, I hadn't thought about that either. And that's a whole other element to these shows that we don't, or I don't consider, I don't talk about, that there's a whole system involved in what we see on the TV show. I often, and we all, I think, understand that there's a producer and there's an editor and this sort of thing. But another angle to that is the emotional vibe that is going on set, where you could have a producer or a set of producers. Like, let me just throw out a scenario. You just got to figure that the producers and the crew, after hours, when they have a beer after work, they probably talk about the cast members, right? It doesn't seem likely that they hang out and say, we want to be professionals. There's probably zero ethics when it comes to this sort of thing. And they've got to have some cast members that they hate. They're like, oh, that Andrew guy, da-da-da. Or when we ask him questions, he just doesn't comply. He makes it so hard for us to get what we want out of him. And then you could imagine that would influence subtly or not so subtly how they shoot it and how they manipulate it and how they edit it. You could absolutely imagine that. And so Yeah, interesting. And Jolie Lucian, I love that you comment because you know behind the scenes stuff that, you have an expertise that I don't have, and I don't think many of the viewers and listeners have, that it could really help to, flesh it out. 90 Day Fiance, Big Ed number 70. Dilma. Oh, by the way, in this episode, I must have asked for a lot of reassurance on some level. There were a lot of nice comments, which I read and internalized, and thank you very much. Dilma, along these lines, says, "You're my favorite teacher. Thank you so much for all that you do. Your videos have literally changed my life." End of comment. Yeah, a number of people said something along those lines, and I just have to. So on one hand, I'm embarrassed because I don't want to come across like I'm stuck up or something, but I do take that in. That is why I do this. I'm not waking up in the morning thinking, okay, let's go to work and literally change people's lives. But more generally, I am, as I always say, trying to make the world a better place. And I put a lot of effort into this. A lot of my life centers around what I'm doing right now. I have to make sure that I'm in the right headspace. I have to make sure that I'm healthy and I have energy and that my mood is okay and that I have the time and that there's no distractions. The dogs are taken care of and my life is taken care of. I learned upon making content for the internet that it's a lot different than what it seems. A lot of YouTubers and podcasters, it has the feel of they just flip on the camera or the microphone and they just start randomly recording, and any quality producer doesn't do that. You could argue that like Ethan Klein and these kinds of people, that might be how they do it, but even them probably not. But anyway, point is that I put a lot of effort into this because I'm actually trying to make the world a better place. And so when people actually tell me that it's working, you are validating my existence. And so I suppose it's a success, or I should take in and really acknowledge, it's hard for me to do it, that I have, because I know I've changed people's lives as clients of mine or as students of mine. And that makes sense to me because I had those experiences as a client and as a student myself. And that makes sense. It's well understood. But to be a podcaster and a YouTuber and to have that happen for people in that way is, I think, less understood and less something that you can hold up, right? There are people in my life, in my personal life, they'll ask me, we'll catch up and be like, "What are you doing?" And we'll talk about how our career is going or something. And they will, because some people just don't really understand how podcasting and YouTube works, that they'll indicate to me like, "Really? Like, people care? They watch you on YouTube and they care that much? Why do they care? Why do they watch you watching TV?" That, I can just tell for them it just makes no sense. And, on some level it is kind of strange, but not really. I mean, there's so much suffering and so much misinformation and so many of us, I would say the majority of us really on a daily basis, are trying to survive emotionally and relationally and mood-wise and health-wise. And that's normal. The Buddhists understand that suffering is a part of life and it's just inherent. And our culture and our society and the internet just kind of denies it or talks about it in this very harmful way. And the fact that there are people like me, and there are others, of course, who have a more, I would call it a more healthy angle, a more acknowledging angle, it would make sense that I would literally change people's lives over the internet. It's hard for me to say that out loud without quickly saying, well, it's not, because, one of the things that, this is just behind the scenes, there's this, this dialectic among therapists that on one hand, of course, when we decided to become a therapist, we wanted to improve people's lives. We might have even wanted to, quote unquote, heal people from their traumas or something. And, but when we acknowledge that, there's often this voice that's either told to us or it's internal that we will quickly say, like something that I would often say would be, or a client comes to me and is in the office and say, okay, this past year you have literally saved my life. I was suicidal. I didn't know what I was going to do. My life was in shambles. I was emotionally a wreck. And through my work with you, I feel better. I feel hopeful. I'm no longer suicidal. I'm no longer depressed. I'm working things out in my life. I'm healing from my traumas. And, thank you so much. there's a very common response from therapists that we feel like we're supposed to say, which, and I have said many times, which is, well, look, I'm glad that the therapy has helped for you, but I just want to point out that it wasn't because of me, it's because of you. You were the one that had to do all the things. You were the one who had to work hard. I just provided the landscape. I just walked along with you on the path. Now, on one level, that can be a therapeutic thing to say because you want to give the client the real knowledge that they are powerful and strong, and they don't need me necessarily to be healthy and to be strong and to have a good life. So that can be a therapeutic intervention. But on the other hand, I think there's this culture among therapists that we're not supposed to acknowledge that we might actually be life-saving to people. You know, you think of like a ER doctor or something. Someone comes in with a gunshot wound, and the physician and the medical team literally save the person's life. That without that medical attention or without the ingenuity of that medical team, the individual would have died. And to acknowledge that this team saved this person's life, I don't imagine that physicians necessarily will push back on that. At least they shouldn't be. But there's something about in my field, which is, it's more intangible, right, with traumas and this kind of thing, that we're just like, you know, I didn't do it. And I think that is, you know, there's a dialectic there. Because on one hand, you don't want to feel like as a therapist, like you have that much power, because we don't. You don't want to think we're a god or that, you know, we literally save the world with our therapy or something. And there are charismatic people that will say things like that, you know, Teal Swan, this kind of thing. They'll have this vibe of arrogance and narcissism. So we don't want to come across like that, of course, and there's always that worry. But on the other hand, can't we just acknowledge that we pour a lot of our life and energy and money, and, you know, because there's a lot of money that you have to spend to become a therapist, to get a graduate degree, to do all the things. And I put a lot of effort into this. I would like to think like my expertise, my work, my hard work results in positive things in the people that I work with. So there's a dialectic there, of course. But similarly, when I acknowledge that maybe I have actually, as Delma and many other people said it, you know, my videos have literally changed Delma's life for the better. Is that okay to acknowledge, and should I acknowledge it? And actually, not only is it okay, but is it important that I acknowledge it for my own sake and to keep going and to be rewarded for what I do well. You know, there are things that I do well that are along those lines, and there are a lot of other things I do as a content provider that actually might not do that. And so I would want to go in that direction where I actually am a positive, you know, there's a lot of different angles to this. But so I'm saying this out loud just because I'm processing it, but also because I want you to know that that's how I take it, and it's important to me. And I don't let it go to my head. It doesn't. At no point am I like, oh my God, you know, I feel like I'm either way beyond that in terms of maturity or something, or I don't know, or I have too many internal voices telling me to not go down that road. I don't know. But long story short, I appreciated all the comments, and really all the comments that I get ever along these lines. It is a big deal to me. It's a back and forth conversation that I like to have with y'all. All right. Big Ed 71, Sarah says, I love when you demonstrate how to apologize properly. My partner and I struggle in this area. When I apologize, I provide context, but he just wants me to say sorry with no explanation or context. He thinks that providing an explanation is making an excuse. It's so frustrating. End of comment. Yeah, so I don't know what's happening between you and your partner, Sarah, but if I was to take a guess, it's possible that he was taught that to provide an explanation, and he might have been doing this himself when he was younger. He would provide an explanation, not as an excuse, and he would be punished for it, or he would be making an excuse and he would get punished for it or something. And so there's a lot of dogma around apologizing in our culture that if you provide an explanation, you are making an excuse. And even if you are very clear, this is not an excuse, I'm just providing some context as to how I got there. It doesn't excuse it, but it does provide some factors as to how I got there, and I'm going to work on that, blah, blah. But there's a lot of dogma around apologizing that is obviously not healthy and not accurate, and one of which is that if you provide any kind of explanation, it's excuse. So what you might have to do, and I recommend couple therapy, of course, for this, but you could, in addition to that, or in couple therapy, actually just say to your partner, so I'm about to provide some context, but in no way is it an excuse. I am not excusing what I did. And then as you provide your explanation, you have to demonstrate that it is an actual explanation. Like, so a common thing in couples is parenting. People will fight about parenting. And so let's say your kid is having a meltdown and your partner steps in and is just like, hey, you're going to have to go on a timeout if you don't calm down. And then you, in the moment, are like, I don't think our daughter is having one of those forced, like voluntary meltdowns. I think the kid is legit having an actual triggered moment here. I don't think the kid has control over their emotions. It's just different reads on what's happening. And you, in the moment, say, honey, like, maybe we could just give her a second to kind of. So your husband feels like you're undermining him. Okay, common issue. And then your husband or your partner comes to you later and it's just like, you're always undermining me. You're always doing this. And you actually think, I probably was. I was kind of anxious. And so I probably should have not said something in the moment, maybe pulled him aside or something like that. Because I don't want to, because I do that. I tend to micromanage him while he's parenting our daughter. And, that would feel really bad. Even though I think I might be right, it's not worth undermining my partner right in front of our daughter. So you could say, yeah, I'm sorry that I undermined you in that moment. That was wrong of me. Let me provide an explanation. This is not an excuse. I'm just saying this is where I'm coming from. When I was growing up, my dad was overly harsh with me. And so when I see you being what I think to be harsh, it's not necessarily harsh, but I see it that way. It triggers me and I get upset, and then I have this impulse just to put an end to it right away. And it overrides my higher mind, which is telling me not to undermine you in front of our daughter and to slow down and not assume things. And maybe our daughter was forcing some kind of meltdown, was voluntarily having some kind of meltdown and did need to go on timeout. You're pretty good at that, but I don't know. I can't really tell what's going on with our daughter sometimes. Okay. So as I'm saying that, I hope it's clear in my language as I'm, role-playing this apology, that I'm clearly not making an excuse. I'm just saying, I have this problem. Here's why I have this problem. And here are all the things that I'm thinking around this in a very tentative way. I don't really know, maybe this, maybe that. Whereas if you provide an explanation like, okay, I'm sorry that I undermined you, but the reason why I did this was because you often are really harsh with our daughter. And when you're harsh, I feel like I have to step in because you're misreading the situation. Okay, so there's a big difference there, right? And the second one, you're providing an explanation, but it's not really in line with an apology, right? And so for your partner, if it was the second one, they'll obviously have a problem with the explanation because it's not really taking responsibility, right? So it could be that, I don't know. But it also could just be that your partner is just blanketly labeling any explanation as a problem. All right, Big Ed 73. KB says, Dr. Hana's explanation of Liz really speaks to me. I'm exactly like Liz, and this is why I keep getting into these really abusive relationships. It's sad because I know it's happening again, but I can't seem to stop myself because I'm so alone in my life and I just want to be loved. End of comment. Yeah, KB, I'm really sorry that you're going through that. I'm guessing you have a lot of relational traumas in your life. And of course, going through an abusive relationship is rough, and then going back to the relationship is rough. And the reason often is because as I was saying, and it sounds like it resonates with you, from an outsider's point of view, or even from an insider's point of view, you're like, okay, being in an abusive relationship is bad, right? I'm being abused. That's bad. There's a lot of bad to that. But then you always have to consider the alternative, right? How bad is that? And for some people, given their relational traumas, their self-esteem, their optimism about the future, their support system, the alternative to the abusive relationship is way worse. To be alone, to be stuck in your own incompetence or your own loneliness or your own desperation, your own racing thoughts or something, can be 10 times worse than actually being in an abusive relationship. So the key is that if you're because often what people will say to you is just get out of the relationship, and certainly society says that. It's similar to when people have addiction issues. Often it's because of trauma, and if you just tell someone abstain from drinking or abstain from meth, just stop, just say no, just go cold turkey or go through treatment or whatever. If you just take away the substance, obviously there's a lot of issues with trying to attain sobriety through that, but if they just go back to their life, then they'll suffer from the things they started using substances for in the first place. The reason why the individual, for a lot of people, the vast majority in my experience, the reason why they started using those substances to begin with that led to an addiction is because they were trying to deal with trauma and they had no way of dealing with it. So when you're trying to abstain or recover from substance addiction, or you're trying to recover from an abusive relationship, you have to do two things. One is to get away from the bad thing, the abusive relationship or the addiction. And two, at the exact same time, a replacement to that coping has to be instituted. So for the individual getting away from an abusive relationship, so that has to happen, right, to get away. But then two, there has to be a robust system of treatment, of support, of emotional health, of a lot of things that have to be in place. And, that's hard to build. For some people, it's basically impossible because they don't have the money or the resources or the know-how or the people or the money or the privilege or whatever. It's really hard. People in my field, we talk about this, is like, you got to build a support system. You got to get the help that you need. You got to get a therapist. Our society and our system is so effed up that people come to me like, I don't know what to do. How do I? And I'm like, well, here's what I recommend you try to build as a full, healthy system of life. But I'll tell you, for myself, it's hard. And I have the privilege, and so a lot of people don't. And yeah, I'm not saying it's hopeless. It's worth trying, of course. Sometimes for some people, it could just be one relationship, right? It could just be one friend or one family member that is with you through thick and thin for the 3 months as you extract yourself from an abusive relationship, or one therapist or one social worker or one DV advocate or something. So Big Ed 74, Joseph says, gang, I have a confession to make, and all I can do is hope that this is a safe space to make this confession. I was under the impression that the word was pre-Madonna, as in like before Madonna, P-R-E, Madonna, not prima donna. Like the person felt they were going to be Madonna, they were pre-Madonna, and was acting like the center of the world as a result. End of comment. Joseph, I love stuff like this because I do this all the time. When I do stuff like this, I'll announce it. Like there's this one time when this was just like 5-10 years ago. I was like, understand. I just realized those are two words, because understand I just think of as just a word, right? But it's actually a compound word, and you understand. So you're under the stand. I mean, I don't know if that's where it comes from, but it does make metaphorical sense that it's like you have a foundation, you're under the stand. It's like a foundation, so you get it. I don't know if that metaphor makes sense, but it did to me. And so I announced it to a couple people when I suddenly realized that. And 99% of the time, I just get a lot of blank stares. People are like, huh? Well, yeah, duh. Or, never thought of, whatever. It seems people just do not care. And I'm always like, even if you already knew this about, like you understood this, at the very least because when people do this to me, like you, Joseph, you're just like, I never realized that prima donna was prima donna, which, by the way, I think is Italian for first woman. It's like it had to do with the first singer, the primary singer that would sing on stage was the prima donna. But if you, Joseph, you're telling me, I always thought it was pre-Madonna, like you thought you were developing into a narcissistic center of attention, Madonna, like the rock star, the pop star. If you would have told me that, I would have been like, oh my God, that's amazing. So things like that, I find just to be delightful. I don't know why, I find it to be, maybe because it happens to me a lot, I don't know. Natalie 29, Maria says, Trish 1,000% called Natalie a hooker. So I was wondering, do you think actually she might have done that? Because as Trish started to reveal more about herself, I'm starting to think she might have actually said that. I love Dr. Honda's genuine benefit of the doubt he gives everyone, the sweet cinnamon roll that he is. Fanny says, after your reminder to take care of yourself because you deserve it, you really, really do, I've taken to saying, thanks, Kirk, out loud in response. That's funny. Natalie 30, Samira says, I think Natalie's desire to go back to Mike might have to do with the war. I'm first generation from a family of refugees who fled war. Subconsciously, I can imagine it really affects her desire for safety. End of comment. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That makes a lot of sense. I could totally see that happening. Natalie 31, Mellum says, so I was asking, do people still use Skype? And Mellum says, I do, but I'm so vintage that I still don't use a smartphone. Natalie 32, Mia says, I unfortunately recognize some of my own behavior in Natalie. I am so desperate for a connection that I will go back to partners that I think will be more stable, even in cases when it isn't in my best interest or even fair to put other people in that position. End of comment. I'm glad you have that self-awareness, Mia, and I hope that you get the help that you need in order to become more aware of it and also heal from the relational traumas that result in you having that. The episode that Mia and Berto made about compliments and your needs, there were some very nice compliments in the comment section, and I thank everyone for that. That's very nice. Mike says, we forgive you because we love you. So I was talking about how my favorite comment was when someone said, hey, I know that you're a good person, essentially. I know that when people attack you for mistakes you make, I know that you're a good person, and I give you the benefit of the doubt. And Mike was basically reiterating that, and thanks, and a lot of other people did. So that really helps. So everyone, don't be a jerk face, be vulnerable, and take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do. Thanks, Kirk.